Hello, I'm Maria Hall Brown. Welcome to LA Currents. 43 miles of waterfront, 7,500 acres of land. The Port of Los Angeles is the nation's premier gateway for international commerce, and I am delighted to be joined by its executive director, Eugene Seroka. Welcome. Welcome.
Thank you, Maria.
All right. So, as the executive director of the Port of LA, you obviously knew early on that as the largest container port in North America, it would certainly play a huge role in this pandemic. And then in the first part of March, Mayor Garcetti also charged you with being Chief Logistics Officer for the city. That's a whirlwind of activity in a very short period of time. What were your first thoughts and actions and strategies, and how did this all affect you?
Well, the first thought was we had to get to work. And we needed to assemble a team, put a process together, and act very swiftly to help our frontline medical workers and the hospitals that are serving our medically ill and COVID-19 patients. So I was really lucky. We put together a volunteer team right here at the Harbor Department that included Eugene Sharma, David Libatique, Erica Calhoun, and then 20 other volunteers who wanted to chip in and make a difference.
Well, and obviously it was wonderful news when the deal was struck with Honeywell for the masks that came along. And you had actually said that this was kind of based on a personal relationship, and I would imagine maybe part of your team had something to do with that.
Well, it was our own Eugene Sharma who was tracking down leads around the world. But to step back for a second, the interesting thing is we got to work immediately on trying to research this market and understand what was taking place. We identified an omni-channel distribution look at this industry that had been fractured and really wasn't working very well. There were a number of salespeople out in the market selling personal protective equipment for very high prices, even compared to several months ago. So we decided that we weren't going to wait any longer, rely on others to do our work, and we felt that a direct-to-manufacturer plan was the way to go. And we were fortunate enough that Eugene had tracked down a lead of someone who knew the Honeywell people, and we got into dialogue with their sales group right away to see what could be possible across this spectrum of medical supplies. And then we were very fortunate. The Honeywell people were as interested as we were in trying to help our frontline workers, and we were able to fashion this agreement for 24 million N95 NIOSH certified masks over a 2-year period.
Were you actually there before the national group showed up there, as far as the arrangement with Honeywell? Did you get there ahead of all of the pack?
Well, there were a number of people involved, as we were told. We never dig into who else the company is dealing with, but I think we positioned ourselves quite well, and we showed that we had an understanding, at least a cursory view of the marketplace, and we were able to give them demand signals or what the market needed pretty quickly through our research. So I think our timing was impeccable, and so was theirs, as they wanted to re-enter the medical community.
Remarkable foresight on both parties' parts. All right, so now you have this contract over a period of 2 years for these 24 million. How is that coming about? And when's the first delivery? How much is going to arrive? And I know Honeywell has said that is actually running ahead of schedule. So does that bode well for the city of Los Angeles too?
Oh, we plan on it too, but our first delivery of 100,000 masks is due by the end of this month, by May 31st. And they'll slowly ramp up production to a peak of 1.2 million units beginning in November throughout the balance of the contract. So we're as eager as Honeywell is to get these products right out to our doctors, nurses, technicians, and so many others.
And I imagine that requires a lot of prioritization, determining who's going to get what and how fast. So how is that working out from your perspective?
That's been a lot of research too, Maria. We've looked with the county at where the COVID patients are, what hospitals are spending the most time on the number of patients that they're attempting to treat, where folks need equipment. We've heard some really horrible stories of hospitals who are sending staff out to grocery stores to buy hefty bags because they can't get the isolation gowns. Folks that are using masks 4 and 5 times when they're meant to be disposable after a visit with each patient. So it's just gut-wrenching to hear these stories. But we wanted this to be a data-driven approach. Let the numbers direct us on how we can get the product and speed it to market. And that was part of what the mayor's vision was too. Using this great port of Los Angeles and LAX airport, could we find a way to really move this product through our two great assets here in Los Angeles? Our longtime relationships with the domestic transportation network can also be helpful. So how can we expedite these products? But equally as important, finding alternative manufacturing for the PPE or the personal protective equipment was key. We did not want to step on the hospital's toes. We didn't want to push their priority down with their known manufacturers, so we went out and found others. We've even got companies here in California that are switching their production facilities into this PPE market, or otherwise their factory workers would be at home right now without jobs. So the creativity from people like Lance Hastings, who runs the California Manufacturing and Technology Association, has been also key in this networking concept. In the end, whether we know people directly or not, supply chain is still a relationship-based business. We want to show that we can be a good customer, and these companies want to show that they can deliver for our hospitals.
You brought up an interesting point about how manufacturing is changing in order to meet the need of what's happening. So prior to this moment, or currently in this moment, have a lot of the PPEs been offshore and not domestic? And is the pendulum sort of shifting into more domestic-based manufacturing?
Yeah, I think you're starting to see a shift, Maria, but it was interesting. A number of outlets in mainstream media have reported the amount of PPE that was shipped overseas at a time where many thought we should be preparing here on the ground with our hospitals, doctors, nurses, and technicians. There was one article that described 280 million units of these supplies were shipped in one day out of the United States to overseas markets. The foresight was limited. So I think we've seen a retraction of that, the inability to get products in from overseas as quickly as we needed when there was a paucity of product on the ground was also an eye-open experience for many. There is no real semblance of a federal stockpile, and unfortunately here in California, a nation state with 40 million people, our stockpile was oversubscribed. So we said we couldn't wait any longer. We wanted to build a stockpile right here in Los Angeles, and we're beginning to do just that. We've got products of most categories and the N95s on their way, and hopefully we can speed these products to market. May not be the answer for all the inventory needs, but I think we can plug some gaps and fill some holes right out of the chute.
And there have been a lot of conversations about the competition amongst cities and states trying to get access to these PPEs and the price of these PPEs. And yet it seems like Los Angeles is in a good situation because of the arrangement that you were able to make, as well as being very resourceful.
Right, and this was part of the discussion the mayor had as well, that being the second largest city in the nation, we've got a very strong procurement department today. We supply some 45,000 city workers, including the Los Angeles Police Department, fire, our emergency management services. So could Logistics Victory Los Angeles coattail on that already strong procurement area that we have? And I think that's made a big difference. We've got people like John Trivgoda, Melissa Uselin, who really have a deep knowledge of procurement, and we just asked them to help us find the way to these PPEs so we could get them to market, but could not have done it without folks like that.
Well, and you bring up a good point. Love LA. You know, it made obviously for a very nice acronym for a very specific approach to things. So all in general, that whole Love LA initiative included obviously procurement, but I imagine it's a lot more.
It really is, and it stands for Logistics Victory Los Angeles. And in this war against COVID-19, the coronavirus, there will be a day that we curb and then eradicate this virus. But for the time being, it has great historical value to us. Here in San Pedro during World War II, we were building Victory-class ships for the U.S. Navy using Kaiser steel. Today, Kaiser Permanente is a very prominent healthcare provider, not only in Los Angeles and the Southland, but throughout California and the West Coast. And today, as we battle towards victory against this virus, it brings to mind the successes and all the hard work that went into the last rendition of this victory campaign for the here and now. And we have a great deal of pride in our history at the Port of Los Angeles, and that gives some of us in this generation great momentum to move forward.
Well, speaking of moving forward, obviously, besides these financial arrangements that you have made with Honeywell, for example, there are also a lot of people donating. There are a lot of people requesting. So how is that all fitting into the hierarchy of everything?
Right. So to give you perspective, Maria, when the mayor asked us to take on this logistics role, we basically started up a new city department within 7 days. We put a procurement plan together in about 48 hours while studying the market and seemingly learning by the hour about the nuanced effect of the medical supply chain. What we then did from there was try to put together some strategic partnerships. Now, we have a long way to go, but we're starting to build inventory in all categories. But you have to thank people right off the bat like Harbor Freight, who have made 3 substantial donations of face masks and other protective gear right off the bat. The folks at Apple donated 160,000 face masks. Operation USA provided some of these isolation gowns that are so hard to find today, in addition to hand sanitizer and other products, including gloves. So the outpouring of support from so many people. Next Trucking, right up the freeway in Gardena, brought us those 3-ply face masks. And shipping giant CMA CGM has an airplane coming over with some face masks, both medical grade as well as protective, that'll be here in Los Angeles next week. And these folks from Marseille have been partners for years. We were friends with the founder and their family while doing business in our shipping industry, and they too have come asking what they could do to support Angelenos.
The efficiency of all of this is almost mind-boggling, given the fact that it had to happen in the parameter of time that it had to happen and the critical need. Are you stunned by how fast government moved?
I came from the private sector, and it's not surprising based on the talent that we assembled, the willingness and the vision of this mayor, who we all look up to. And in times of crisis like this, we need strong leadership, and I don't think there is any doubt that Mayor Eric Garcetti is just that leader. When we put everybody together on the ground, not a lot of us knew this medical supply chain, but we all studied, pored over books, read on the internet, learned. More importantly, we talked to the medical experts and those in the supply chain. Mats Feinberg is one guy over at Kaiser that tried to coach us up early on what to look for, what to look out for at the same time. So we've been fortunate enough to develop some partnerships really quick so we could help study up that much faster.
And I hope these public-private partnerships would continue after this crisis is over, I would hope.
Yeah, we see 3 phases right now, Maria. One is where we sit today, and that's a triage phase. We're doing everything we can to get supplies to the front line, like many others are doing right now, too. Second, as we begin to see this illness curbed over the coming months or maybe calendar quarters, we'll have just a moment to catch our breath and then start the replenishment process. We've heard most of the hospitals say they want to get back to a safety stock level or a level of inventory that makes their medical experts feel more comfortable, obviously, than they do today. Once we get our legs back under us, then it's time to fix this medical supply chain. And I think what the city and the port are doing right now by bringing information technology, PO-level data, and the ability to share that information so we see not only the demand signals, but how we can supply quicker and fill gaps will be a real difference maker in the future.
Well, you have this, one might think, temporary hat that the mayor has asked you to wear, but you have a permanent one, and that is obviously here at the port. So the port being such a critical part of commerce internationally, globally, and locally, I'm sure you've seen some adjustments taking place before even the pandemic hit. Obviously, there was a trade issue at stake.
We've had 2 real shocks to the supply chain. One is the trade policy out of Washington you mentioned. And in the end, what that policy accomplished was an increase in imports, a decrease in exports for 14 consecutive months, and a widening of the trade gap. Not the result, I don't think, that the folks in Washington would have anticipated. And then on the heels of that, which included a 16% drop in cargo at the Port of Los Angeles in the fourth quarter of 2019, we got hit with COVID-19. an exceptional period during Lunar New Year in Asia where the central government of China extended that holiday for 2 weeks to try to begin that isolation of folks who may be sick, the quarantine of those who were, and trying to right themselves on what they were going to do from an economic standpoint, as well as manage this real public health crisis. I lived in China during SARS. I saw firsthand what a viral epidemic looks like, and this will probably be 10 to 15 times greater than what we witnessed during SARS. By the sheer number of patients who've been diagnosed, the unfortunate and incredible mortality rate, and then to the dollar value this has impacted economies around the world. And without the important preparedness we're seeing now with more than 1.3 million cases in the United States, we have got a long way to go.
What did we learn from the SARS epidemic? Because as you said, you were literally a witness to what was happening, not just with the virus itself, but also with what it did to the economy of that area.
Transparency, swift action, and ownership are the three things we learned then. And unfortunately, not all of that carried over. As we travel overseas here at the port, because our customers are mainly domiciled in Europe and Asia, we began charting this virus back in December. And I called for a halt to international travel shortly thereafter, and then all domestic travel early in 2020. That obviously wasn't the case in many areas. But at the same time, what we tried to do was begin to compartmentalize our business and see exactly what we needed to do. I gave you the example of our video meetings on a daily basis here in this city department to make sure that everybody is communicating and talking. Daily basis, weekly meetings, gathering people of industry, note, and stakeholder groups on regular occasion. We don't want to lose touch. And in this time, I feel it's our responsibility to over-communicate what's happening with our employees, with our partners, our customers, and across the city family.
Okay, let's begin with one of those categories. What's happening with your employees?
The employee base of 905 people are on the job and working. About half of our employees are sworn and civilian peace officers, including also construction and maintenance and construction crews that are out on the job every day. So about half of our workforce is out in the field, day in and day out. They're managing themselves by physical distancing, following Los Angeles Health County Services, as well as the Centers for Disease Control and other medical expert advice every day on the job, to and from and with their families. The other half of the group is mostly telecommuting. We've also given some time to take care of elderly parents, young kids who are out of school with no daycare opportunities, families who have spouses that both work that are taking shift work between them to care for family members. So we're trying to be as sensitive as we can to those groups as well. And we have about 10 people, maybe 15, that come into this building on a daily basis, our leadership team, to try to manage all facets of the port. We've got 8 distinct lines of business, and today I'm very pleased that in the freight side, which means about 80% of our top line revenue, is operating very well. I put a drone up in the air about once or twice a week to take a look from a public safety perspective at that 7,500 acres. But also as residual effect, we see the connectors, the rail, the truck activity, the space on our terminals, and how the ships are working. And I can say right now that I'm very pleased at the fluidity of the activity on the port. So as our economy begins to reemerge, we are ready. We're ready as a leading indicator in that economy to start bringing in the goods, maybe 30, 60, 90 days before they'll be needed at distribution centers, on store shelves, or for our internet shopping requirements.
You have been a huge proponent of technological advancements here at the port. So do you attribute a lot of this fluidity to the fact that there are already automation systems in place that are easily managed, even though you might have to do it from a distance?
Yeah, digitization, I think, is the key to the supply chain's future. Unfortunately, not a lot of people have taken us up on that here in the United States. Today, Maria, we have in place the nation's only port community system. We lag Europe, Asia, and the Middle East by maybe 3 decades in this digitized era. I think we've made some advances due to our partnership with U.S. Customs, our carriers that call the Port of Los Angeles, and our 7 Los Angeles marine terminal operators. The two Western railroads have now come on board to start building a railroad persona, if you will, or a module that'll handle the rail transportation piece of what we do on international shipments. So I'm very encouraged by the people who have joined the Port of Los Angeles. More ports in this country need to join because we need a national port community system.
Interesting. Let's kind of jump back a little bit to those that have been affected by the pandemic. And we did talk about the employees here at the port, but there are also a lot of clients and customers, et cetera. So who has felt the most dramatic challenge and pain from what has happened with this entire global pandemic that you've seen from the port perspective?
Right. I think it's hard to single out any one group because we've all felt the pain economically, physically, and mentally in different ways. But our longshore groups, our truck drivers, our other union-affiliated members who do work right here at the port have all seen this downturn and closure of the economy affect their jobs. And to put it very simply, less cargo means fewer jobs. Right. Our business through the first 4 months of this year is down about 15%. Our shift work for longshore labor is edging out in front of that just a little bit, down 18% year over year. And every job is painful. That's not happening on these docks today. It impacts our kids, our families, the schooling, putting food on the table. It's painful for this harbor enclave because this is a company town. And the company is this Port of Los Angeles that everybody works towards, whether you own a restaurant, a small shop, the dry cleaners, or you work right out there on the docks. So it's especially painful for the people that work here. And please remember for your audience that 1 in 9 jobs today in Southern California, our 5-county area, 1 in 9 jobs or more than 1 million people go to work every day with a job related to this port complex. And it could be administrators like us, warehouse people out in the IE, the truck drivers I mentioned, logisticians, and so many others. So as this port goes, so does the economic value of this Southern California region.
And there have been industries, obviously, not just locally dramatically impacted, but all of those deliveries that aren't happening, all of those shipments that aren't coming across the seas. I know you had spoken about retail having a really hard time. Do you anticipate that that's going to pick up, or is it almost insurmountable at this point for those industries to see a bright future, at least soon?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think between the trade policies out of Washington, the retaliatory tariffs in Beijing, and now the shutdown or the shuttering of our economy, we're going to feel the knock-on effects through the rest of this year. Fast fashion, the people who put out goods, clothing, apparel for spring fashion, summertime, back to school, that's been cut by about half. We've already missed a couple of cycles. Retail was down in the first quarter by 8.7%. John Gold from the National Retail Federation is saying that retail shipments will be down double digits this year. So that will continue. The big box retailers seem to be holding their own for this point in time, but the broader retail market, without the access of you and me going into stores, has really been hit hard. Automotive is projected to be down, car sales specifically, by 27% this year. And the automotive industry, the big 3 in Detroit, plus our other international car makers, represent about $20 billion in trade right here at the Port of Los Angeles. So there are not too many that are immune to COVID-19 and the economic closure that we've witnessed thus far.
I'm a novice to all of this, so forgive my naive question. What about perishable goods? Because don't the containers that leave your port end up in the Midwest somewhere, and don't they come back filled with other things? I mean, isn't there a fallout from not being able to move things across the country as normal?
Absolutely, and the export side of our business has been hit and I think will face irreparable damage. Mainly on the heels of the trade tariffs. Even the Phase 1 trade deal is behind. $23 billion in export dollar value was expected by the end of February. Only $9 billion worth of goods were shipped to China specifically during those 2 months. With less import cargo happening between the fourth quarter of last year's trade issue and all the way through now. That means less containers that go to the Midwest of the United States. So our agriculture companies, co-ops, farmers, family businesses have struggled to get those empty containers in the right place for the proper shipments, and are witnessing a time where they just can't get their shipments to the overseas markets because of a lack of equipment. And this is one of the main reasons I've called for a national port community system. While individual companies try their best with customers every day, could you imagine if we had one window that we could look through to see the entire country, where its transportation network was, where these containers and customers could be combined, and then start helping our economy to recover? I think it would be quite powerful. And it's a call to action for all ports throughout the country to jump on board. Now is the time.
Are they being receptive to your outreach, to this concept, to this idea? Because they obviously have a pretty substantive stake in the game as well. If the Port of Los Angeles being the biggest player in town, there are a lot of other players as well.
That's right. And there's a question for the port directors to answer themselves.
All right, let's hope they have the right answer. But also, when things get going, there's also warehouse space. I imagine at this point in time, aren't you rather full in terms of your warehouse capacity?
Yes, we are, with less than 1% vacancy right now. And if there was any silver lining out of this ill-advised trade policy, it was that we brought a lot of imports in ahead of these tariff milestones, which U.S. companies paid. Please make no mistake about that. American companies were paying this tax on imports from China. With that, we were able to load our warehouses up pretty full. And as we went through this uneven time at the beginning of COVID-19 with China factories shut down due to this great health concern, we were able to draw down that inventory from our warehouses. So we were prepared. I don't think it was planned that way, but maybe better than others would have figured. Now we're starting to see, due to the lack of demand, those imports starting to creep up in the warehouses. But I think we'll have good release points as the economy begins to reemerge, and especially through the omni-channel distribution network of internet sales and fulfillment centers. But this is an area, Maria, that we watch every day, because if one part of this supply chain breaks, the entire area will collapse. So we've got to be careful, even as the old adage says, the weakest link has got to be watched in this case.
Well, speaking of the weakest link, and speaking of all the links, obviously, Northern Hemisphere, the United States, et cetera, is one piece of this puzzle. Do you have an idea of how the rest of the world is looking in terms of their shipping issues, capabilities, and challenges?
Worldwide demand is down overall. The shipping community on the liner side, the people that own the vessels, claim they may lose as much as $23 billion this year. And that will by far outstrip what was lost during the Great Recession of 08 and 09. If folks aren't buying in countries like France, Spain, Italy, that impacts these folks. But to see the closure of the American economy, the largest in the world, and still being at odds with its largest trading partner and second largest economy in the world, has people in our industry globally very concerned.
Let's end on a positive note. You are a forward-thinking person. You have definitely incorporated things at the port that were very advanced. I'm sure that you have some hope for what is going to play out.
I absolutely do. And I think this is the greatest port on the face of the earth. The engineering marvel that we see today was planned over 113 years. I think it's an opportunity for us to reinvent ourselves. Some things you cannot manage, such as trade policy. We cannot stop this global health crisis in and among our own community. But what we can do is look forward to how we are going to better respond to global needs and our supply chain partners. I think now we overinvest and oversubscribe in our export market. That's going to help U.S. companies reconnect and get to new markets overseas as our economy emerges. And I've said that a couple of times because I don't believe our economy closes then opens up. If you open up in phase 2 and it's 25% of your normal restaurant capacity, you're not carrying 25% of the cost. You've still got to pay rent, insurance, healthcare benefits, et cetera, to your employees. So we're going to reemerge, and I think we will start that reemergence with our agriculture and manufacturing sectors right here in California. We're going to connect those folks in the Midwest that have had a paucity of containers and get them ready to really load up and start flying this cargo right through the Port of Los Angeles.
It was really wonderful to speak with you.
Great to see you too, Maria.